Don't Call Me Baby by Andai. Chapter 7.
I don't get paid enough.
Shota was stirring honey into his tea, looking out the apartment window curiously at his students all grouped together on the grass near Heights Alliance, when his phone banged. He resolved to ignore it for the moment. After all, his class was being suspicious on the front lawn, and that clearly demanded his attention more. But several subsequent pings later, he groaned. Fishing into his pocket, he pulled out his cell phone and eyed his newest notification warily. You have 4 new messages from Ida Tenya. Unlocked respond. Typing in his password with a raised eyebrow, Shota navigated to his messaging app and opened up his conversation with Ida. 1650. Ida Tenya. Sensei, as the class representative of 1A, it is my responsibility to inform you that our class has collectively decided to go on strike due to the unfair conditions of the last test. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause, but we firmly believe that our objections must be heard, and this was the agreed-upon course of action. To be clear, the unfair conditions we are protesting with the strike refer to the halving of the usual time allotted for written assessments with no prior notice.
Aizawa. Your test time was halved because the content of the test was halved, Ida. How do you even plan to enact this strike?
A group of 1A students huddled together with new ferocity on the grass outside, making exaggerated hand motions and arguing loud enough that the murmur of their voices could be heard faintly through Shota's apartment windows. Ida Tenya. I will get back to you with more details once we sort them out. This was not very well planned, I will admit. Shota snorted in equal parts amusement and exasperation and continued stirring his tea, watching the group on the grass debate the pros and cons of whether or not to do something stupid. Probably. He discarded his stirring spoon in the sink, all the while wondering absent-mindedly, and not for the first time, how this class, out of all his others, managed to wiggle their way past his defenses. 1723. Ida Tenya. After some discussion, we have decided that the best way to enact our strike is to, as a group, cease attending classes, effective tomorrow, until we are given either a chance to retake the test, or the test is dropped from our final grades altogether. Is this acceptable?
Aizawa. I don't think you understand how a strike works. You're not supposed to ask me for permission. The only way I'm dropping the test from your grades is if I drop your grades.
Ida. What would that entail?
Aizawa. Expelling you from classes altogether.
Ida. That is unfortunate. Problem children group chat. Chat includes Funky Elbows, Saro, Alien Green, Ajido, Nyum, Ida, Smallbean, Midoriya, Mr. Murder, Bakugou, Mind Meld, Shitso, Octopus, Shoji, Keklian, Hegagare, Kung Fu Panda, Ojiro, Yao Mamo, Yoyobozu, Defying Gravity, Uraraka, Pikachu, Kabanari, Dahard, Kirishima, Bunk Butch, Jiro, Frankophile, Aoyama, Kermit, Ashley, Snow White, Koda, Lounge Boy, Sato, Eiji, Tokoyami, Fucking Never, Todoroki, Dazawa, Aizawa, and Scrim. Present Mike. 1732. Kiklian. Aizawa Sensei, how could you do this to us? Dazawa.
You've done this to yourselves.
Pikachu. Oh, fuck, I can't believe he's done this. But also, yes, I can. Eiji.
I, for one, thought our terms were reasonable.
Mr. Murder. You all should have just fucking studied. Alien Green. None of us have that kind of discipline, dude! Mr. Murder. I have literally seen you work for hours on end on choreography with 0 breaks. Alien Queen. It's different! Dazawa.
You really didn't think this through very well, did you?
Alien Queen. Me specifically, or? Dazawa.
Your class as a whole. This whole strike idea. Do you even know how strikes work? Smallbean. Well, at the most basic level, strikes are meant to negatively affect an employer. The workers, usually unionized, all stop working for their employer, and the employer loses money because not only are they not creating product to sell, but in most cases, they still have to pay rent for their business's building and utilities and taxes and maintenance. So when the workers all stop together, the business goes under for lack of laborers. Large boy. Midoriya, we already know you have the highest grade in civics. You don't gotta flex like that. Smallbean. Sorry!
Large boy. Bro, I'm just teasing. Don't worry about it. Aizawa.
Correct. Now, why wouldn't a strike work in your case?
Kung Fu Panda. Are you trying to turn this into a lesson? Aizawa.
If trying to teach you why you're all being stupid counts as a lesson, then yes.
My mouth.
Because you don't care if you make a profit.
Aizawa.
Go on.
My mouth.
I mean, you wouldn't hesitate to expel us all. You've expelled entire classes before.
Aizawa.
True, but not the answer I was looking for.
Define gravity. Because a strike wouldn't impact you negatively, right? The purpose of a strike is to hurt the employer's profit, but if we just don't go to school, you're not harmed by that at all. Aizawa.
So in the end, who would the strike hurt?
Keklia. Us? Pikachu. Oh, fuck, I can't believe we done this. Aizawa.
So, do you want to rework your demands?
Octopus. I'm honestly kind of surprised that you're humoring this at all, Aizawa-sensei. Aizawa.
Oh, believe me, I'm this close to suspending you all.
Funky elbows. Why do I get the feeling that his fingers are touching? Aizawa.
You're not wrong.
Scram. Shut up! Get some slack! They're trying! Aizawa.
For a brief, blissful second, I forgot you were here. And trying doesn't cut it in heroics. I'll give you all a hint. You're trying to convince me to change your grades without any further effort on your part. Fix that.
Pikachu.
Yes, sir, Aizawa-sensei, sir.
1824.
Nyum. Aizawa-sensei, we've reworked our request.
Aizawa.
Oh, so they're not demands anymore.
Scram. I reminded them how well it usually goes when anyone tries to demand anything from you. That is to say, barley. Aizawa.
True. What's the newest request?
Nyum. As a class, we realized that you were right. If we are to request any leniency or assistance with our grades, we must put in the appropriate effort. Therefore, we would like to ask if we could take the lowest scored subject from our test and write a 3 to 5 page paper to help supplement our test grades in some way.
Aizawa.
Make it a 4 to 6 page paper and write on how the heroics and support industries have been affected by strikes in the past. Maximum 10 points added to your test score, not to go past full credit. Due Tuesday.
Pikachu. Thank God!
Nyum. What I believe a complimentary means to say is thank you very much, Aizawa-sensei.
Aizawa.
Don't get used to it.
Direct messages, Aizawa Shoda plus Yamada Hazashi.
1840. Screaming husband. Smile. Tired husband.
What?
Screaming husband. Babe! You never give extra credit or makeup opportunities! You're going soft! Tired husband.
Don't be stupid. Half of them would have had to take some sort of remedial class with the way they scored on that exam, and I don't want to have to plan extra lessons. It was only logical.
Screaming husband. Logical would have been having them write the essay on their worst answer question like Ina suggested. Tired husband.
I'm proving a point.
Screaming husband. Sure! Salty! Tired husband.
You realize that you haven't queued a new song to put your hands up radio for the last 2 minutes, right? That you're just sitting in there in silence.
Screaming husband. Fuck! All things considered, Shota thought that his students were doing a pretty good job of not contacting him directly, despite the fact that they had his phone number and, therefore, immense opportunity to be bothersome. He should have known that it would only last so long. Shota was in the teacher's lounge during his free period trying to draft up a lesson plan for the new course that Nuzu was trying to implement as an experiment when his phone buzzed multiple times in quick succession. Absent-mindedly, he reached over and unlocked it, only to find a message from someone he definitely wasn't expecting. 10:33. Kaminari Denki. Hey, Sensei, hypothetically, if I left my sports bra in the laundry and my spare one doesn't fit me since I hit a growth spurt, should I, tell the hypothetical heroics teacher for the day that I'll be wearing my binder? Or would it hypothetically be better to just be dysphoric as fuck for a period or what? Hypothetically speaking, of course, but also please hypothetically respond within the next 5 minutes before I have to be back out of the locker rooms! Out of the hypothetical locker rooms! Hypothetically! Shota pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. He'd be lying if he said he hadn't expected the students to start sending him casual texts every once in a while. His warning at the beginning of the semester had cowed them momentarily, but his kids this year were tenacious and, unfortunately, aware of the soft spot Shota held for them. Besides, he thought to himself, if it's between being left in the dark to something important, or being texted a little too casually, I'd rather they trust me enough for the second option. Even if it gives me a headache just thinking about all the memes I might start getting at odd hours of the night. Aizawa.
Go to the teacher's office in the locker rooms and ask them. If there's no one there, the door should still be unlocked. In the desk closest to the door, second drawer down, there should be some spare clothes, including sports bras.
Shota thought for another second before adding,
And, hypothetically, if none of those work, you have the incredible convenience of a classmate who is able to literally produce anything. I'm sure Yaoyorozu would be more than happy to help.
A moment passed before he got a response. Kaminari Denki. You're the best sensei! Hypothetically! Shota held back a smirk, but didn't hesitate to roll his eyes. Sometimes Shota wished that Kaminari wasn't a trendsetter in 1A. Well, most of the time he wished that, but still. 1921. Kirishima Eijiro. Hey, Sensei, so, quick hypothetical question. Salta's taking a nap, but a couple of us really want cookies, and Midoriya had this carton of American ones that one of his relatives sent him, and it says bake at 350 F for 13 minutes, but I'm really, really hungry, so hypothetically, how bad of an idea would it be to just bake them for 1 minute? 4,550 Fahrenheit. Also, how do I convert to Celsius again?
Aizawa, a bad enough idea that you had to ask me. The oven won't even get close to that temperature.
Kirishima. Eijiro. Oh, well, if that's the only problem, then Todoroki and Bakugou says it's not an issue, thanks.
Aizawa, Kirishima, do not.
One morning, about a week later, Shota walked into a surprisingly quiet homeroom and, not for the first time, questioned his sanity when he accepted Nezu's teaching offer all those years ago. Everyone was in their seats, but no one said a word for fear of waking Uraraka, who, go figure, was floating both herself and her desk about a foot below the ceiling. And asleep. Shota blinked twice, took a deep breath, and then let it out wearily. There had always been certain accommodations that students at UA needed, and while some were trickier than others, they were always manageable. There were the usual ones. Size accommodations were fairly common necessities, which was one reason the doorway to the classroom was so large. Shoji had to get a uniform without sleeves. Sero needed a uniform with wide sleeves to fit his elbows through when getting dressed. Ida's pants had to be appropriately loose for his engines. Ojiro's pants had posed an interesting dilemma for obvious reasons, and Mineta, before he'd been expelled, had needed clothes even smaller than Aries. Other than that, though, there hadn't been many other requested accommodations from the students. If Shota was being honest, he wasn't surprised a problem like this had finally shown up. Shota slowly walked forward, assessing the situation and watching the rest of his students out of the corner of his eye. They were all watching him curiously, obviously waiting to see how he'd wake the girl without both her and the desk immediately crashing to the floor. Shota hummed in thought, then turned to Tokoyami, who looked a little surprised to be addressed.
Tokoyami,
He asked quietly.
do you think the Dark Shadow could hold up her desk when it falls?
Tokoyami thought for a moment before responding in a murmur.
I'm certain he could if we closed the blinds and turned off the lights.
Shota nodded and waited as Aoyama got up to turn off the lights while Midoriya and Yaoyorozu closed the blinds. Enough light filtered in from the hallway for Tokoyami to easily maintain control of Dark Shadow as he brought him out, the eldritch creature seemingly pleased to be included in something. It let out a small croon of surprise, which was quickly quieted by Tokoyami, who explained the situation, Dark Shadow nodding in understanding.
Try not to touch her, if you can help it.
Shota spoke directly to Dark Shadow now, knowing that the being got fussy when people spoke to or of it as if it weren't there.
We don't want her waking up before you have a grip on the desk. It might fall on top of her.
Dark Shadow nodded eagerly, happy to be useful, then crept up and out of Tokoyami to secure the desk in midair without touching Uraraka at all. Once done, he sent Shota a thumbs up. Wordlessly, Shota moved Uraraka's chair to the side, grateful that it hadn't been affected too. He eyed the girl in the air, positioned himself underneath her with arms up and ready to catch her when she fell, and braced himself. "Uraraka," Shota said loud but not harsh. The last thing he needed was for Uraraka to wake up panicking. "Uraraka, wake up." The girl stirred, and after repeating her name once more but louder, Uraraka finally opened her eyes blearily. She moaned, undoubtedly feeling an onslaught of nausea from using her quirk on herself. Shota saw Ashido rush to get a waste bin out of the corner of his eye as he spoke up to his still-floating student. "Uraraka, release your quirk, I've got you," he reassured her. Uraraka immediately acquiesced, murmuring a shaky, "Release!" and dropping into Shota's waiting arms. The desk remained suspended effortlessly in Dark Shadow's grasp, despite gravity returning to it once more. As smoothly as possible, Shota lowered Uraraka into her desk chair, and Ashido placed the waste bin in front of her in case she was sick. Uraraka bent over to tuck her head between her knees, and Tsuyu leaned over to rub soothing circles into the girl's back as she breathed deeply. After a minute, when it became apparent that she wouldn't be sick, Uraraka looked up sheepishly, a tiny tint of green still on her face. What happened?" she asked. Mina took the waste bin back to the front of the room, and Dark Shadow slowly maneuvered Uraraka's desk back to the ground, gently placing it down. Shota crossed his arms, leaned back against Sato's desk, and raised a single eyebrow with as little judgment as possible. "You tell me," Shota replied easily. "I walked into homeroom to find you in your desk. We're floating 10 feet off the ground, and you asleep." Uraraka flushed. "Oh, She rubbed the back of her neck in a gesture picked up from Midoriya. "I guess I must have dozed off before class."
Shota nodded. "I gathered. Do you usually use your quirk in your sleep?"
Uraraka laughed a little self-consciously and blushed deeper. Sometimes. Usually I wear gloves in my sleep to keep that from happening, but sometimes I take them off in the middle of the night and end up on the ceiling," she admitted with a weak grin. Shota hummed in consideration, pushing off of Sato's chair and uncrossing his arms. He sent a thankful nod Dark Shadow's way, and the being preened happily before retreating back inside Tokoyami as the lights were turned back on and the blinds reopened.
"I see. If you think it would help, the support department has plenty of quirk-canceling bracelets available to students who are prone to using their quirks in their sleep. It might be easier than wearing gloves every night,"
Shota offered. Uraraka's eyes widened in surprise, as did a few others. Shota sighed deeply as he headed back to the front of the room and fitted his entire class with a weary look.
"Okay," he demanded. "How many of you accidentally use your quirks in your sleep?"
About a third of his class raised their hands, and Shota withheld a groan. Kaminari, Ashido, Kirishima, and Uraraka's hands all went up immediately. Midoriya's and Todoroki's followed after a moment, almost hesitantly, and after a pointed look from Kirishima, Bakugou upped and thrust his hand into the air angrily as well. A few of the others had their hands half raised, some of them rotating their hands at the wrist in a so-so gesture. Ojiro, Shoji, and Jiro all had their hands raised like this, and though Shota couldn't see it, he had a pretty good feeling that Hagakane's was too. Pinching the bridge of his nose to fight off a headache, Shota willed himself to be patient.
"All right,"
he said after a moment, trying not to imagine the kind of chaos that some of his students' quirks could cause while unleashed by an unconscious user. He'd peripherally heard of Midoriya using his quirk in his sleep once before, but since no repair requests had been put in for the boy's room, Shota had thought, foolishly, he now realized, that maybe it wasn't that big of an issue. Then again, it was Midoriya, and apparently Bakugou and Todoroki, and that constitutes a good trouble magnet portion of the class alone. Honestly, it was surprising that the dorms hadn't been raised half a dozen times in the night by now.
"That was an oversight on my part. I assumed that you all had the appropriate measures to control your quirks in your sleep before the dorms and that you brought them here. Since I guess I was wrong, anyone who needs a quirk-canceling ban for sleep from the support department should come talk to me during break. I'll write you a hall pass to go get one during your free period."
A few relieved grins filled the room, and even as Shota started on the first lesson of the morning, he He made a mental note to have the maintenance crew bolt Uraraka's desk to the ground in case she dozed off again in class. Shota wasn't one to voluntarily spend an evening in the common room more than once a week if he didn't have to, but that didn't mean he wasn't aware of what happened when he wasn't there. And honestly, it was pretty hard to miss the fact that 1A had suddenly become obsessed with watching Disney movies every night they were able to. Oh, well, Todoroki mentioned one night that he'd never seen any of the Disney movies, Midoriya revealed when Shota questioned the boy on it, rubbing his neck and flushing, as if it were Midoriya's fault that Enji was an oppressive piece of shit. Shota simply responded, shoving his hands in his pockets and sagging his shoulders before continuing down the hallway. Shota wasn't a huge fan of Disney movies and never had been. Anything that prompted Hizashi to break out into song whenever the right situation applied was never high on Shota's list of favorite things. And though he'd always be grateful at the calming powers the Little Mermaid had over Eri, that didn't mean Shota liked knowing every word to Under the Sea. Unfortunately, it did mean that he recognized when it was being quoted. Double unfortunately, the class's recent Disney binge meant that his kids had apparently developed his husband's propensity to break out in random quotes and singing. One Wednesday afternoon, about a week into the kids' Disney marathon, Uraraka, Hagakure, Ashido, and Tsuyu approached Shota with hopeful eyes and one of the forms that the students had to fill out whenever they wanted to leave campus for recreation. Taking it, Shota's eyebrows slowly raised as he processed their request.
You want to go to one of those sketchy carnivals?
Shota asked in mild disbelief, looking up at the girls in front of him, only to see them beaming back. Yeah! Ashino chirped excitedly. We made friends to see who could go on the most strides without throwing up. Mina! Uraraka hissed slowly, not so subtly elbowing the pink girl in the ribs and causing her to wince before backtracking. Ashito hesitated. We want to eat cotton candy and get our faces painted and go to the petting zoo.
Shota shot them all an unimpressed glare before looking back down at the form and realizing where the carnival they wanted to attend was. Frowning, Shota shook his head and handed the form back to them. There have been a few violent protests and riots in that area for the past few weeks,
Shota explained at their crestfallen looks.
Are there any other carnivals in the area that you can go to where you're less likely to get maimed or kidnapped?
Both Ashido and Uraraka seemed taken aback at that. Tsuyu's expression didn't change and Shota couldn't see Hagakure's. Yeah, there's one in the Jima prefecture. It's a little further away, though. Shota reached to take the form back, grabbed the pen from the table he was sitting at, and started editing the girl's request form.
Well then, I guess you'll just have to account for travel time,
he said dryly, signing off on the paper and looking up at them.
Thank you so much, Sensei!
Ashido started, moving to take the paper from Shota and run it to administration before he snatched it back with a warning glare.
But,
he said pointedly,
I don't want any of you riding anything with more than 8 feet of clearance above the ground at any time.
Ashido squawked indignantly, and even Uraraka looked a bit put out.
Those things are death traps,
Shota deadpanned.
I won't have you surviving countless villain attacks in your first year just to be done in by a carnival ride.
We can always use Uraraka's Quirk as a backup safety precaution.
Tsuyu croaked thoughtfully, and Shota tried to ignore his surprise that she, usually reasonable and safety-oriented, was actually on board with this.
Even if that wouldn't run the risk of having your provisional licenses revoked for non-hero-related quirk uses in public,
Shota said pointedly.
The answer would still be no.
But Dad! Hagakure whined dramatically, only to shut up when Aizawa's eyes started glowing a threatening shade of red.
No rides or no carnival,
Shota growled.
That's final.
Ashido pouted, finally snatching the form from Shota's hand before throwing a pointed look at Tsuyu.
But on land, they understand that they don't reprimand their daughters,
she complained, to which Tsuyu just nodded as the group of girls started to turn and leave.
Bright young women sick of swimming, ready to stand.
Tsuyu agreed with a thoughtful ribbit and showed a father urge to facepalm as they disappeared around the corner and out of sight, leaving their homeroom teacher with Ariel's lament stuck in his head. Rebecca's incident with sleep floating her desk seemed to break the dam, and different Quirk-related issues of varying severity started to pop up everywhere Shota turned. One day, during a particularly rigorous written exam, Shota would know, he designed it, Ashido raised her hand halfway through looking sheepish and embarrassed. Shota raised an eyebrow.
Ashido, you know I can't answer any questions.
No!
She interrupted him, nervously wiping her hands on a rag in the top corner of her desk.
I was wondering, if you had any Quirk-canceling bracelets on you by any chance?
Most of the class was looking at her curiously by now, with the exception of the most focused students whose eyes remained on their tests. Shota raised an eyebrow, digging into one of his drawers and producing one such bracelet.
Why?
He drawled, bored.
Well, my hands sweat acid when I get nervous,
Ashido admitted with an embarrassed little laugh.
and no matter how hard I try, it always destroys my pencils.
She finished lamely, and Shota realized that the washcloth she kept on her desk was a sweat rag. Around it lay smaller parts of slain pencils, half melted and dripping onto Ashido's desk, which Shota had thankfully had the foresight to acid-proof at the beginning of the semester. Shota responded, tossing the Quirk-canceling bracelet to Ashido and watching as she caught it easily.
You might want to swing by the support department and see if they can make you any stationery that can hold up against your quirk, in case you ever need it in the future.
Ashido nodded with a smile and put on the bracelet, wiped her hands once more on her sweat rag, and looked back down at her test.
Yes, Ashido.
Shota sighed a second time as the girl's hand slowly raised once more, her eyes still on her test.
May I please borrow a pencil?
She asked meekly, looking up at Shota through her eyelashes with a sheepish smile. Shota fought the urge to roll his eyes, and tossed her a pencil as well. 14:30. Ashido Mina.
Hey, Sensei! So, hypothetically, how many detentions would we get if we totally accidentally broke the security bot?
Aizawa.
Explain.
Ashido Mina.
Okay, so, it's hot as heck out, right? And so, Turdo was making a few ice blocks for us to cool down because he's a pro, and then Zero accidentally slid down one of the grass hills on one when he tried to sit on it, and that gave us the idea for a slip and slide because, again, it's hot as heck out and the weekend. So we thought, well, Todoroki can make the ramps, but what can make it slippery? And Sue suggested that she could regurgitate some stomach acid, and we were like, thanks, but no thanks, absolutely not. And then Yamamomo offered to create some kind of slippery stuff, but we all knew it wouldn't be enough and it would tire her out a lot.
Aizawa.
Get to the point, Ashido.
Ashido Mina.
Okay. I lubed up Toto's slip and slide ice ramp with a neutral form of acid, and it worked better than we were expecting, and it shot Ida right into the security bot when he insisted to go first to test safety. And Ida looks like he's about to cry, or he probably would have texted you apologizing a million times already. Please help!
Aizawa.
After school detention for everyone involved, and you have to clean up the mess.
Ashido Mina.
Awesome! Thanks, Sensei! Now Ida can stop crying!
Aizawa.
And you have to help Hatsume repair the bot during detention.
Ashido Mina.
Well, thanks! Ida just burst back out into tears because he isn't ready to die yet! It was nice knowing you!
The Disney references got worse before they got better. Shota might have assumed as much if he hadn't been trying desperately to ignore them in the first place.
All right, dumbasses.
Bakugou growled as he dropped a math textbook and 3 notebooks onto the dining room table. The loud bang effectively cut off Ashido, Kaminari, and Zero's conversation as Bakugou sat down across from them threateningly.
Ew, mess!
Kaminari whined, pretending he didn't see the glare Bakugou shot his way.
You begged me to help you!
Bakugou seethed.
I have better things to do than help you idiots!
No, please, Bakugou-sensei! Kaminari cried desperately as Bakugou began to rise and collect his materials.
I'm sorry, please teach us!
Bakugou scoffed and sat back down, ignoring Kaminari's sigh of relief as he opened up 2 notebooks and the math textbook to bookmark pages.
All right,
Bakugou insisted. Let's get down to business. To defeat the Huns! Ajido and Kaminari immediately interrupted singing while Sero made a fake karate chop motion above his head and let out a ha of accompaniment. Shota grabbed his freshly brewed coffee and made a break for it before the group could devolve into more singing. As he made his way to his apartment, he heard a sound behind him that sounded a lot like Bakugou, repeatedly slamming a math textbook into his forehead. Shota could relate. In retrospect, Shota thought wryly, I'd rather have a Quirk issue or Disney song right now instead of this. Todoroki, Midoriya, and Ida were all sitting in front of him, the latter's 2 cheeks flaming as Midoriya looked straight at the ground and Ida resolutely at the ceiling. Todoroki looked as impassive as ever, with maybe a slight hint of irritation in the way his eyebrows turned down ever so slightly. Shota let them stew in their discomfort for a little while before he finally pinched his nose between the thumb and forefinger, closing his eyes and sighed out,
all right. Who wants to tell me what happened?
Ida looked to be trying to formulate an explanation or apology or both in his mind, and Midoriya appeared to be silently praying for the ground to swallow him up. So Todoroki's the one who answered Shota's question in his signature monotone.
Depends on what you heard,
Todoroki offered with a single quirked brow, and Shota took the moment that Ida and Midoriya spent gawking at their boyfriend to close his eyes and count to 10. Inevitably, when he closed his eyes, Shota was attacked with the incredibly uncomfortable memory created less than 10 minutes ago. The event that led to all of this in the first place. It usually wasn't a good sign whenever All Might sought out Aizawa in the first place, and there hadn't been a single instance where the former number 1 hero had done so with this look on his face. Shota kind of hated the uncertainty that brought.
Aizawa-san?
Toshinori asked hesitantly, approaching Shota's desk slowly and with a beet red face. Shota would have probably smirked at the man for whatever predicament he'd found himself in if he hadn't the sinking feeling he was about to be pulled into.
I was wondering if I could, speak to you for a moment.
Shota remained seated at his desk in the teacher's lounge, pointedly ignoring the looks the two were getting from a few of their co-workers, while desperately hoping that All Might would spontaneously change his mind and decide he didn't need Shota's help in dealing with whatever disaster he'd found himself in.
Speak away.
Shota deadpanned and watched as All Might began to fidget in front of him.
I think it might be better to discuss this in a more, private setting.
All Might managed, his voice raising in pitch throughout the sentence until he was practically squeaking by the end of it. From halfway across the room, Midnight, with her uncanny ability to sniff out any interesting developments, wolf whistled. Confession time, she crowed teasingly, earning a glare from Shota and a startled frown from All Might.
I married Namori.
Shota deadpanned only for Hizashi to send him a traitorous thumbs up from the desk next to him. It's all good, Yagi! Shota's blonde idiot of a husband crowed loudly, the teasing grin on his face accentuated by a cheeky wink. Just don't forget to invite me on a few dates! I'm always down for free food! It was hard to tell whether All Might was more confused or embarrassed, and Shota's eyes twitched as he stood abruptly to grab the other man's hand and drag him out of the teacher's lounge and out of range of his irritating co-workers.
What, Yagi?
Shota asked tiredly, running a hand down his face and absent-mindedly wondering if he had enough time left in the lunch period to take a quick nap.
Well, I needed advice on how to handle awkward situations with students.
Yagi responded tentatively, rubbing the back of his neck like Midoriya often did. Honestly, Shota wasn't sure whether half the habits that those two shared started and who had picked up what. Shota gritted his teeth and prayed for patience with the men in front of him who, for all his success and experience as the number 1 pro hero in Japan for decades, was still incredibly new at teaching.
You'll need to be more specific.
Shota finally managed, leveling All Might with his most enemies look in an attempt to get the other man to spill the beans. It seemed to work, All Might wincing as he wove a cautious, awkward tale.
Well, I was heading over here from 2B's classroom, and as I passed the hallway, I noticed some, suspicious noises.
All Might, Shota interrupted, impatiently praying for strength.
And the boys might have been engaged in inappropriate school activity.
Yagi finished in a rush, his face growing progressively redder until it would pass for a very large and oddly shaped manna. Shota blinked once, twice, and kept his eyes closed after the third time.
Okay, one thing at a time. Which boys? Young Ida, Todoroki, and, Midoriya.
Yagi wheezed out.
They face.
Shota repeated, unimpressed.
Face attached.
Yagi squeaked, and if Shota wasn't currently occupied by the awful picture his mind was painting as it connected the dots, he'd be filing away how easily the former #1 pro was reduced to a beet-red nervous wreck.
Kissing! Are you trying to tell me?
Shota said slowly, concentrating on his breathing in an attempt to ward off an oncoming headache.
That you walked in on Todoroki, Ida, and Midoriya making out.
Any remaining blood that hadn't already been in Yagi's face flushed there in such a fierce display that Shota was mildly impressed that he didn't pass out. Some of it spurted from his mouth as he coughed at Shota's blunt question, and Aizawa stepped back to give Yagi space to get a handkerchief out and recover. No, though, Shota was just left with irritation at having his lunch interrupted and impatience as he was forced to look straight at Todoroki and accuse,
All Might walks in on you, 3-sucking face.
Ida launches into a volley of apologies so vehement and loud that it almost bowls Shota over. Todoroki looks to be fighting the equal urge to roll his eyes and smirk at the same time, and Midoriya, well, Shota's never subscribed to Todoroki's conspiracy that Yagi and Midoriya are secretly father and son, but from the way the green-haired boy in front of him flushes so hard that his head begins to look like a strawberry, Shota will admit that in times like this, it's easy to see the resemblance. In the end, Shota just slaps them with a week's worth of detentions and, more pointedly, remedial lessons afterwards about situational awareness. Shota remembers what it's like to be young and dumb and infatuated, and if he's being honest, he doesn't fault them for that. But he'll be damned if he doesn't do something to discourage having to actually deal with his students going through anything similar. Luckily, not all of the kids' Quirk-related issues made themselves known as abruptly or dangerously as they had the potential to, as Shota found out one day after a particularly intense week of heroics classes. Ironically, Bakugou's own problem didn't even start off with any sort of characteristic bang! It's odd, though, because, as Shota notes from the nearly unhinged look in the blonde's eyes, and the way that even his friends are giving him a healthy amount of space, Bakugou's less explosive that day, despite obviously being at the end of his rope. The feeling was one Shota was intimately familiar with, especially with this year's class, but Bakugou's manner of expressing such a feeling usually culminated in more explosions than usual, as opposed to the borderline silence the boy had been clinging to all day. It was uncharacteristic in a way that was starting to unsettle the entire class. A few of Bakugou's classmates would send him occasional wary glances, something most of them hadn't done since the second week of school. Even the more boisterous members of Class 1A were significantly more subdued in tense apprehension of getting on some invisible last nerve. In most cases, agitation led to anger in some form of increased volume. That was predictable, at least, and far less unsettling than the quiet, seething testiness currently radiating from what was usually Class 1A's most vehement member. Now that Shota was thinking about it, actually, Bakugou had been growing progressively quieter throughout the week. Kirishima at least seemed to know what was going on, if the concerned but quiet glances he'd been shooting his friend were anything to go by. Uraraka, too, seemed to have some idea of what's up, leaning against the front of Kirishima's desk and engaging him in whispered conversation that, for once, was actually a whisper. Bakugou either didn't notice, unlikely, or didn't care about their conspiring based on the way that his gaze was firmly fixed on the worksheet in front of him. Shota was still trying to figure it out. 20 minutes later, the kids taking a test, when Mike inadvertently burst in with the answer. Well, technically, what Mike had burst into the classroom with was Shota's bento, which he'd left on the kitchen counter earlier that morning by accident. As a few of the kids of 1A hid snickers or smiles behind their hands at the domestic gesture of his husband bringing him his lunch, but Shota's mind was preoccupied with the involuntary wince drawn from Bakugou by Mike slamming the door open a few moments prior. The sympathetic and understanding looks it had drawn from Kirishima and Urabaka, respectively, seemed to verify Shota's suspicions. Bakugou must have felt the weight of Shota's lingering gaze, because after a minute or two he looked up and met his teacher's eyes with a challenging scowl that still managed to lack its ordinary heat. Shota raised a single eyebrow in response, causing Bakugou's scowl to deepen before he returned to the test in front of him. Blessed silence returned to the classroom as Mike made his way out, fist-bumping Ashido and Aoyama as he passed. Bakugou's shoulders relaxed once more as the rustling of paper and pencils became the only noise in the room, and Shota took the opportunity to do a little research on his new theory. The bell rang half an hour later, the kids bringing their papers up to the front and heading off to lunch. Bakugou, uncharacteristically, was one of the last few to bring their tests up, probably reveling in the last few moments of silence he'd get before he was thrust into the cacophony of the cafeteria, if Shota's hunch was correct. When he reached the front of the room, Shota made eye contact with him before commanding quietly, "Bakugou, stay behind for a bit." Bakugou's scowl from earlier returned full force at the command and deepened at the good-natured, "Ooh, Bakugou's in trouble," his friends gave him for being held back as they made their way out of the room. Oddly, the explosive blonde didn't say anything in response, even once everyone had left the room, choosing to simply raise a demanding eyebrow at Shota in a request for an explanation once they were alone.
"How long has your quirk been giving you headaches?"
Shota asked bluntly, noting the surprise on his student's face with the satisfaction of realizing his theory had been correct.
"Ever since I got it."
Bakugou grumbled sourly, crossing his arms and leaning back against the desk across from Shota's. Shota raised an eyebrow.
"I assume it doesn't happen that often."
Bakugou shook his head in irritation, though if Shota knew him at all, then he knew it was irritation at letting himself be seen as weak in any way, as opposed to irritation at Shota for asking.
"Nah,"
he responded, closing his eyes to grant himself a momentary reprieve from the brightness of the classroom.
"Usually only after I practice with my quirk a lot in a short period of time. I can deal with it." "Any other symptoms?"
Shota prodded, the side effects of topical nitroglycerin still fresh in his mind from having Googled them while the students were taking their test. Honestly, he thought to himself with no small amount of irritation, I should have thought to look into that sooner. Another general research session on complications that the kids' quirks might pose might be in order, on top of the first one I did at the beginning of the year. Bakugou opened his mouth, thought twice, and huffed out an irritating sigh upon seeming to realize that Shota would find out if he lied.
"Nausea and dry mouth when it gets especially bad," he admitted gruffly, "but the migraines are the worst of it." "Can I assume you've had a quirk doctor test the extent of that?"
Shota asked, and going from the way Bakugou's mouth twisted in distaste, he could guess that his student was thinking of the same, more severe side effects that Shota now knew to be related to topical nitroglycerin exposure.
"If you're talking about the fainting and the blood pressure shit, yeah, we checked,"
Bakugou grit out.
"Dizziness, blurred vision, or anything else that could affect your safety during heroics class and internship?"
Shota asked pointedly.
"I don't need to tell you how dangerous it could be to suddenly have a dizzy spell while rescuing civilians."
Bakugou grit his teeth, opening his eyes enough to glare at Shota.
"I know, okay?"
He sighed and ran his hands through his hair in frustration.
"Look, the only side effects I've ever gotten are the migraines, nausea, and dry mouth, and it sucks, but I can deal with it, alright?"
Shota gave Bakugou an appraising look for a moment before eventually nodding his assent.
"Alright,"
he allowed, watching Bakugo's shoulders relax as he realized he wouldn't be suspended from any heroics activity.
I expect you to tell me the instant that any other symptoms develop or the moment that the ones you have worsen, alright? It's not just a matter of being able to function.
Shota stressed when it looked like Bakugou was ready to just brush him off.
It's a matter of making sure that this doesn't become a problem in the future. I know you want to be the best, and you'll never reach your full potential if you're constantly suffering side effects from your quirk. There's a reason we ask you in the entrance exam if your quirk has any drawbacks. It's not as much to determine if those would stop you from succeeding at UA.
Shota explained patiently.
But to make sure that we can provide you with any supplemental equipment to make sure those drawbacks don't affect your future performance.
Bakugou took a moment to think on that, chewing his lip in thought as Shota waited patiently while the boy in front of him realized he couldn't poke any holes in his teacher's logic. After a minute, Bakugou nodded and said with a small frown,
Alright, I get it. The migraines and nausea and dry mouth are it so far, though.
Shota nodded in easy acceptance, cocking his head to the side as he thought briefly.
I understand. While there's not much I know that we're able to do about dry mouth, there are some measures we can take against nausea and headaches, both with medication and with what support can do to your costume.
Katsuki's eyes flashed in comprehension at Shota's last statement.
Like how Uraraka's suit has those pressure points to keep her from puking when she uses her quirk.
Shota's eyebrows almost raised when Bakugou used Uraraka's actual name instead of a condescending nickname like he did with the rest of the class, but looking back, he supposed it made sense. Kirishima and Uraraka were the only ones it seemed Katsuki felt comfortable enough with to let see him after he had that particularly bad nightmare a while back, and of course, there was the respect Uraraka had earned from Katsuki after their sports festival battle. Even if Bakugou claimed that he didn't have any shitty friends, as he still did every once in a while, the boy respected power and work ethic, and those two were nothing if not strong and determined. In response to Bakugou's question, though, Shota simply nodded.
Exactly. Shinso sometimes gets migraines too, especially when he tries to control a lot of people at once. Since those pressure points tend to be around your sinuses, your mask might need to be modified for a more sturdy material if what you have right now isn't good enough.
Shota rubbed his chin in thought, ignoring the few days old stubble that he'd have to shave off soon, unless he wanted to listen to his Ashiko play.
I'll pick up some costume modification request forms from support after school today. Meet me in the dorm's common room before dinner, and I can give them to you. Try and have them in by the end of the week.
Bakugou nodded, and Shota reached into his utility belt before pulling out a small pill bottle, handing it over to his student, who scrutinized it suspiciously.
In the meantime, Excadrin migraine should at least help with headaches. Take one every 4 to 6 hours. Directions on the back. I have more in my apartment, so you could just take the whole bottle.
Bakugou inspected it, frowning as he shook it.
Is there even anything in here?
He demanded curiously, the normal rattling sounds of a pill bottle conspicuously absent. Shota nodded, trying to ignore the feeling of ineffable lunch break time slipping through his fingers.
Stuff a few cotton balls in the bottle, and the pills won't rattle, and give away your position during stealth missions.
Bakugou scowled. I knew that! He muttered sourly as he opened the bottle and shook a tablet out into the palm of his hand, taking a swig of water before swallowing it. Shota resisted the urge to roll his eyes, and instead started to head back behind his desk. His sleeping bag was calling for him, tempting him to nap for what was left of break.
Go eat with the other problem children.
Shota sighed as he wiggled further into the bag and started to zip it up.
The pills usually kick in after 10 minutes or so. And tell me if you start to notice any other side effects.
Yeah. Bakugou called from the door, already heading out into the hallway, and Shota got this distinct feeling that the kid was rolling his eyes. And maybe flipping him off out of habit. His eyes were already closed, though, and so Shota resolutely did not care. By the time heroics class rolled around later that day, Bakugou was back to his usual explosive self, and the uneasy tension that had fallen over 1A at his uncharacteristic silence had lifted once more. Shota at one point got Bakugou talking to Uraraka off to the side, and a few times he pointed at her costume's nausea pressure points. She predictably lit up, launching off into some kind of explanation. By the time Bakugou got his papers back to the support department for improvements on his costume, it had enough detail to significantly improve his performance during the weeks of most intensive training, and every once in a while, Shinso could be seen quietly accepting an Excedrin migraine from a pill bottle that Bakugou somehow managed to materialize out of thin air. All in all, considering the nature of Bakugou's quirk, the issues related to it were handled uncharacteristically quietly. The Disney references Shota learned a week after Bakugou almost exploded his friends for quoting Mulan during their tutoring session were not strictly limited to classic Disney Renaissance content. At least Shota assumed it wasn't because he'd been in the common room trying to troubleshoot the television connection and wearily wondering when Techie Dad Fix-Its had become his job. When Ashido had waltzed into the common room, walking backwards through the front door and towing off her shoes as Shinso entered after her and began to do the same, shoving his sneakers in a cubby-hole. "Come on, Shinso!" Ashido whined, cocking her head to one side and stretching her hands high above her head as Shinso loudly pushed past her and towards the kitchen. "It was super fun during the cultural festival, and I'm a pretty good teacher."
No. Shinso deadpanned, and Shota could practically hear Hashino's responding pout.
"But," she started off, only to be cut off by Hagakare as she bounced into the kitchen to grab a bag of Doritos. Shota had rarely been so unsettled by any of his students or their quirks as he was one movie night a few weeks ago when he'd come downstairs to grab a cup of coffee and seen 10 floating points of cheese dust and realized they'd been Hagakare's fingers. It took him an extra week to realize why he was so unsettled by that. Hagakare ate Doritos with all 5 fingers on both hands. If Nezu hadn't certified that none of his students were the traitors, Shota would have gone to the principal right that second with suspicions based on the fact that only psychopaths eat Doritos with the pinky on their dominant hand. Anyway.
"What's up, Ashido-chan? Shizuku?"
The invisible girl chirped, tearing into a new bag of chips and reaching in with her whole hand.
"I'm trying to convince Shinzo-kun to come join our dance group after school on Tuesdays, but he keeps saying no without any reasons why!"
Mina lamented, draping one arm dramatically over her eyes and leaning back against the kitchen counter for additional effect.
"Ashido-chan, if your classmates wish not to partake in an activity, it is important that you respect their decision,"
Ida called from where he was sitting and doing homework with Obabaka, Todoroki, and Midoriya at the kitchen table, only to be cut off by another of Ashido's wails.
"I know, classmate, but I wish you'd at least give me a reason."
Ashido sighed dramatically, trailing off with a pathetic look at Shinso. For his part, Shinso just rolled his eyes, reaching up into one of the cupboards to grab a tea bag and a mug as the water he'd set on earlier started to boil. "I don't dance," he reasoned flatly, and everyone in the kitchen and dining room
froze simultaneously. "Oh dear,"
Ida sighed as Midoriya and Ashido both lit up, the latter leveling Shinso with a devilish look.
"What was that, Shinsuke?"
Mina asked, tone sickly sweet as she gave the other boy a last chance to back out of the doom he'd unknowingly walked straight into. Shota, hearing the telltale pitch of her voice, redoubled on his efforts to fix the television hookup, not wanting to be in hearing range when she decided to dive into mischief. Shinso, woefully uneducated when it came to Ashido's tendency to drag others into dramatics, just blinked blankly in response. "I don't dance." A sound suspiciously similar to Ida's hand hitting his face came from the dining room right as Ashido cackled gleefully. Obabaka, Midoriya, and Hagakare giggled in response. "What? Oh." Shinso sighed as Mina did a little dance in the enclosed kitchen before immediately launching into song. "I'll show you that it's one and the same," Mina promised with a little wink shot Shinso's way as the boy poured his tea. "Baseball, dancing, same game. It's easy." Hagakare promised in her own sing-song voice, pointing with cheese-dusted fingers at Midoriya, vibrating with anticipation. "Step up to the plate." Midoriya took over with a huge grin, all too happy to quote a song from the High School Musical franchise everyone knew he loved so much. Start swinging! For a second, Shota thought that his adoptive son wouldn't dignify them with a response. Maybe he didn't know the lyrics or just flat out refused to continue them. After a put-upon sigh that suggested that he'd been put on the receiving end of one of Midoriya's puppy dog looks, however, Shota was surprised to hear Shota continue in an incredibly unimpressed monotone. I want to play ball now, and that's all, he said flatly, placing his knee on the counter behind him to steep before leaning back and crossing his arms over his chest. This is what I do. It ain't no dance you can show me. Shota looked around the cable box in a borderline frantic manner, finally finding the HDMI cable and wrestling it free of a nest of other miscellaneous electronics, with a few strong tugs and muttered curses as his students continued being juvenile in the background. You'll never know, Mina sang all-knowingly, doing a little dance move in the kitchen in front of Shizuo, who watched with a single raised eyebrow. Oh, I know, he responded, still deadpan, not moving, as Mina continued. If you never try, she reasoned, and Shizuo rolled his eyes. There's just one little thing that stops me every time, Hitoshi responded, right as Mina let out a yeah! And Shota connected the last cables to the television, standing up abruptly and ignoring the cracks his vertebrae let out as he began to stalk towards the staircase up to his apartment. Task done and escape in progress! As he climbed the stairs, Mina singing got louder, having the unfortunate effect of following him all the way up to his apartment. Two-step, now you're up to the band. Bases loaded, do your dance. It's easy. Take your best shot.
Just hit it.
Shota grumbled under his breath, finishing the line as he closed his apartment door and hating himself for it just a little bit. Shota had thought that his class would at least stick with the classics, but apparently that had been too much to ask. He's not entirely sure what triggers the next development of idiocy in his students, but Shota wakes up one morning to find several new messages on his phone, all spelling increasing doom for his sanity. Problem children, group chat, 1837.
Kung Fu Panda. Does anyone know where Midnight Sensei posted the art history midterm grades? I can't find it under assignments.
Cake Leon. It's under assessments.
Kung Fu Panda. Cool, thanks.
Cake Leon, thumbs up. 2207. Alien Queen. That's just in! Kami is gay disaster!
Pikachu. Hey!
Cake Leon. Honey, what I do? Pikachu. Hey! Nyum. While I cannot say I support calling out our classmates in such a public manner, Kaminari, we support you regardless.
Pikachu. Thanks! I think. Funky elbows. Why did that feel like a backhanded compliment? Pikachu. Okay, well, if we were gonna tell the whole class I'm a gay disaster, can I at least get some help here on how to woo me, mans? Edgy. Bold of you to assume any of us can help you with that.
Kermit. I mean, at least 5 of us have some kind of experience with that, supposedly.
Edgy. Huh? I suppose you're correct.
Pikachu. At Bakugou, at Diehard, at Nyum, at fucking Never, at Small Bean. Help, I'm gay! Fucking Never.
I'm confused. I thought this was known.
Alien Queen. Holy shit, to the rain, Nyum. Kaminari-kun, you realize you didn't actually tag Bakugou-kun.
Pikachu. Bro, no way Baku is still awake, and I'd like to not die from waking him up by tagging him in a group chat past 9 p.m.
Nyum. Ballad, carry on.
Octopus. Did Ida just meme?
Nyum. I tried.
Small Bean. We're so proud.
Nyum. Smiley face.
Fucking never. I'm still confused what we are supposed to do here.
Diehard. I think Kami wants help on how to get himself a man's, but I just bugged mine into friendship and then went through a few live and death experiences a little and then we were dating, so I don't know what to tell you, man, sorry.
Small Bean. Same, actually? Fucking never. At least the life and death thing.
Define gravity. What? Fucking never.
What?
Nyum. What?
Small Bean. What? Pikachu. Okay, ignoring how suspicious that is, my gay crisis remains unsolved.
Punk Butch.
Kami, there's only one person in this entire chat who can help you in wooing a man.
Pikachu. Whoost! Bunk Butch.
Well, I guess two now?
But don't. Pikachu. What? Oh! Bunk Butch.
Wait, Kami, don't be stupid!
0:44 in the morning.
Punk Butch. Why do I feel like he did something stupid?
Yeah, mamo.
Well, honey, you did essentially just point him to our homeroom teacher for dating advice.
Octopus. Savage. Kung Fu Panda. 'Twas nice knowing him, I suppose. Fuck it never. F. Small Bean. Oof!
Direct messages, Aizawa Shoto and Kaminari Denki.
22:42. Kaminari Denki. Hey, Sensei, hypothetically, how do I get a guy to like me? Shota spent a good minute looking at his phone before groaning, shoving it under his pillow, and trying for 5 more minutes of sleep and a world where his students, damn it, ask him for relationship advice. He should have known that he wouldn't get out of his class's irritating clutches that easily. Perhaps the most irritating thing was that it wasn't even only Kaminari. If it had just been one student, Shota could have ignored the issue sufficiently until it went away, but for some reason, everyone seemed to realize simultaneously that their homeroom teacher was in a very long-term successful relationship, and that made him prime target for pestering. Shota was losing his backbone. Even just a year ago, he'd have expelled any of his students wasting his time on questions about relationships to make an example of his low tolerance for any non-heroics related personal questions. Now, he was sitting at the kitchen table wondering why he spent any time at all in 1A's common areas when he was trying to avoid being pestered and trying to ignore the plethora of embarrassing questions he'd been asked over the past week alone.
Is it unrealistic to be into someone who's your complete opposite?
Kaminari had wondered aloud the morning after he'd first texted Shota asking for relationship advice and got no response. Thank you very much. Shota wasn't sure if his headache came from the fact that Kaminari was being unusually persistent, or if it came from the stupidity of asking that question to him, who had married President Mike in a case of opposites attract like no other. How much is too much to think about someone, Aoyama had asked Thin Air a few days afterwards, eyes darting towards Shota after a moment and trying not to look too put out when the pro resolutely did not answer the question.
I wonder how you can really tell if someone's into your gender, or any gender at all.
Tsuyu had mused aloud in a display that had quite frankly unsettled Shota. He really couldn't tell if she was just wondering aloud or trying to join her classmates in slyly asking their homeroom teacher relationship questions. When is it too early to meet the parents? Midoriya had muttered to himself as Shota was passing out papers to the kids and... What? So it's really no surprise that the first day in a week that Shota chooses to use 1A's wide kitchen table to grade papers, he sees a group of his more bold students start to creep towards him out of the corner of his eye. Doing a quick sweep of the room, Shota even notices that the majority of his class is downstairs and... Sensei? Kaminari asks with fake innocence, and Shota fights the urge to snap. Yes, Kaminari. He manages to grit out, taking deep breaths and reminding himself that after all he'd been through with this class, this couldn't be the reason he expelled them all. Kaminari hesitated in a move that actually managed to grab Shota's attention. The group of friends he'd initially approached Shota with had since fallen back to give the boy a bit of privacy, a few of them shooting encouraging thumbs up at the boy's back despite him being unable to see them. Kaminari's gaze flitted about the room nervously, his thumbs fidgeting with each other before he finally managed to squeak out his question. Can I ask you an actual question? He managed to squeak out quietly, and Shota blinked in otherwise well-hidden surprise. Initially, Shota had assumed that Kaminari's first question earlier that week had been largely a joke. After all, he thought, who seriously asks their homeroom teacher for relationship advice? That's something you'd ask your... parents, Shota realized with the mental equivalent of a facepalm. God, he was an idiot. Shota remembered his own days at UA when he was first starting to figure things out with Hisashi. How he'd come home from school every day and managed to ask relationship questions in what he thought was an inconspicuous manner once a week, until his mothers got fed up with his dancing around things and started trying to give him relationship advice flat out. He'd been embarrassed initially, but ultimately been grateful. And then, when he and Mike had finally started dating, what was the first thing he'd done but called and told his mothers? Kaminari was looking at the ground now, and his friends were trying to engage the rest of the occupants of the common room as best as they could to give the boys some privacy for what should have been a child-parent conversation. Even if Shota hadn't known that Kaminari's relationship with his father and grandmother who'd raised him was a little strained, he could have at least figured out that relationship advice was in the realm of teenage things that was bound to get a little unconventional in a dorm setting. Shota bit back a sigh, took one last look at Kaminari, who seemed to be preparing for disappointment even while trying to remain hopeful, and made a decision.
All right,
he groaned, pinching the bridge of his nose between a thumb and forefinger and praying that even if he knew he'd regret this to some extent, it would ultimately be worth it in the end.
Relationship advice.
Yeah? Kaminari squeaked out, looking about as horrified to admit to asking his homeroom teacher for help on this particular issue as Shota felt giving it. Or, you could just, we could... Never mind. Kaminari turned as if to flee, and Shota raised one hand to let it rest on the kid's shoulder gently but firmly.
I'm going to go make some coffee,
he said deliberately.
And when I get back, you and anyone else who's been asking me for relationship advice this past week, though God knows why you want it from me.
Kaminari bit back a smile at that, and Shota felt something inside him relax a bit.
Can ask a total of 10 questions, and that's all. Got it.
Kaminari's face broke out into a smile as he nodded, and for a moment he looked at Shota with a kind of relief that made the pro hero fondly remember why he taught it all. Shota answers some questions. Shota regrets his life decisions. Nothing is new and life goes on. Despite Shota's most desperate hopes, the impromptu relationship advice session did not signal the end of his rather unfortunate involvement in the romantic lives of 1A. He was absent-mindedly draining the last contents of the lychee jelly pack that constituted his lunch one day, allowing himself a brief moment of mental reprieve by scrolling through cat-focused social media accounts when a familiar blur of white and navy blue sauntered into his line of sight with far too much sway to carry any kind of good news. So, I assume I have you and your little sex ed talk last week to thank for catching 2 of your students getting it on in the restroom. Just now? Midnight asked cheekily, taking obvious delight in the way that several sections of Shota's brain short-circuited at once. What? Midnight, it turned out, had been heading to wash her hands before lunch when she stumbled into the restroom closest to 1A and found, much to her impish glee, Jiro and Yao Yorozu getting a little too wrapped up in the moment.
Kayamon.
Shota groaned through gritted teeth, the cute cat videos on his phone long forgotten and jelly packet abandoned to the waste bin.
As much as I really, really despise thinking about this in any capacity, you know as well as I do that making out does not constitute getting it on.
Nemori just shrugged with a grin, stretching her arms behind her head with the smug look of someone who's won a battle just by waging it.
And I did not give my class a sex ed talk. Who do you think I am? You.
Aww, Shota, his old friend crooned, leaning into Pidgey's cheeks in her typical disregard for personal boundaries, her grin only growing as he smacked her hand away with a glare. You know, I've never been allowed to teach that section to the kiddos.
Gee, I wonder why,
Shota responded dryly.
It couldn't be because you're skating a thin line just being a public teacher as an R-rated hero, could it?
Nemori pouted, knocking him on the head once in retaliation. Rude. You know, if I were you, And be a little nicer to me, unless you want word of your little relationship advice session spreading to our co-workers and effortlessly tearing down that aloof facade you've worked so hard to craft over the years.
Shota simply stared blankly at her in response. I have no idea what you're talking about. You have no proof.
Really? Nemuri tittered, a devilish grin appearing in her eye that Shota knew from experience never meant anything good. Then why did Mike get a text the other night from your dear darling son while we were grading papers containing just the cutest photo ever?
Shota froze as she took out her phone and opened up her pictures app, turning it around so that he could see clear as day a picture of him in the middle of coaching Todoroki how to give a genuine compliment, eat a red as a tomato for what was visible on the back of the boy's neck.
Damn it, Utoshi! Shota thought sourly as he made a move for Nemuri's phone, only for it to be pulled back out of reach at the last moment with a disappointed tisk. No, Shota. Nemuri purred dramatically as she pocketed her phone. Don't be that way. Besides, she grinned wickedly, I've already got the photo backed up to 3 separate places in case you manage to delete this one. I plan ahead, darling. You know that.
Shota's glare, usually able to cow lesser villains into surrender from its intensity alone, seemed to have no effect on his friend after years of exposure. So, are you going to rub domestic torture in my face? He demanded after a moment. Or are you going to tell me what you did to punish my students?
Midnight broke out into laughter at that, drawing the attention of a few of their co-workers for just a moment before they tuned out her antics and returned to their work. Oh, please, Shota. Midnight chuckled, wiping a tear from her eye for dramatic effect. Me? Punish kids for a little promiscuity. I'm not a hypocrite, darling. And the 2 cuties just look so deliciously embarrassed. That was nearly punishment enough. She leaned in even closer, grinned sharp. I told them that they'd get off with me just telling you what happened if they sent me any other pictures they had from that night, and wouldn't you guess it?
Nemuri pulled her phone back out and reopened her Photos app only to scroll through more pictures from that night, taken from a different angle. She started cackling as Shota resigned himself to repeatedly beating his forehead against his desk in the vain hopes of losing consciousness and escaping his current embarrassment.
Damn it, Utoshi! 1834. Midoriya Izuku.
Hey, Sensei, so I have a totally hypothetical question, but in the totally hypothetical situation that a group of us ordered pizza because Tokoyami managed to burn our first attempt at dinner, and we met the pizza guy at the edge of campus because obviously he didn't have a UA ID to get in, but we're still technically on UA grounds, so that we weren't breaking rules. But the pizza delivery guy was actually part of some plot to kidnap some of us for some kind of ransom, but the whole thing was staged incredibly poorly. I mean, really, it was so bad, like, they didn't even think it through, and it failed spectacularly, and no one was hurt at all, and it was more of an inconvenience than anything. Hypothetically, how would we tell you that without increasing the amount which you already worry about attempts on our lives? And also, hypothetically, how would we go about turning in the fake pizza delivery guy criminal to the police?
Aizawa showed him.
Why is it always you, problem child?
Midoriya Izuku.
I don't think that's fair! The villains were after Kanchan at the training camp, and after All Might at the USJ, and I wasn't a direct target at all during Osu, and the raid on the 8 precepts wasn't about me in any way!
Aizawa showed him.
And yet you managed to get tangled up in literally all of those, didn't you?
Midoriya Izuku.
I wasn't even the one that ordered the pizza! Hypothetically!
Aizawa showed him.
Again. And yet. Stay put, problem child, I'm on my way now.
Midoriya Izuku.
But you don't even know which hypothetical entrance we'd be at!
Aizawa showed him.
Kid, I pulled up UA security cameras the instant you texted me. I can literally see the pizza delivery guy being held like a balloon by Ida with Rebecca's quirk and Sarah's tape at the gates of the northwest entrance. There is zero hypothetical to this situation.
Midoriya Izuku. Okay, but if the guy dropped our pizza on the ground while we were capturing him, could we order another one if we still didn't have dinner?
Aizawa showed him. Dear God, kid, wait until I get there, and we'll see.
Midoriya Izuku. Thumbs up. It was a Tuesday, and kids had roped Shota into watching at least one movie of a Harry Potter marathon that was airing on one of the channels UA's cable plan received. Needless to say, the kids were ecstatic despite some of their commentary.
I'm just saying.
Kaminari grumbled through a mouthful of Dorito chips, cheese dust coating his fingers, and eyes firmly fixed on Hermione, where she lay paralyzed on one of Madame Pomfrey's quickly filling infirmary beds.
Dumbledore constantly calling Voldemort by Tom Riddle should have been our first indicator that JK was a TERF. I don't care if they're the worst wizard that ever lived. Dead naming is just a dick move, bro. Not sure Voldemort was technically worse than Grindelwald.
Midoriya mumbled in the armchair next to him, where he and his two boyfriends were cramped, the latter two still managing to pay attention to the movie despite his commentary, due doubtlessly to practice.
I haven't reread the world-building lore in a while, though, so he might have been. But yeah, you're right, JK is cancelled!
Kaminari nodded vigorously in response, grabbing another handful of chips before stuffing them in his mouth. Man, Jiro muttered from her place on the couch, Shinso and Kaminari on one side with Yaoyorozu, who had to close her eyes any time someone new was about to be petrified, snuggled up against the other. I swear that all the boys in this franchise are dumb as rocks. They should rename the entire series based on Hermione. She sighed. Instead of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, it should be called Hermione Granger, and that time I used the power of research and deductive reasoning to make sure Harry didn't die. Yaoyorozu giggled in agreement. Jiro grinned, emboldened by her girlfriend's approval. Hermione Granger, and that time I figured shit out and literally ended up petrified for the cause, and it took my friends weeks to figure out that I had the research on my person. Jiro provided for the second title with a laugh.
Wait, Hermione had the research on her.
Todoroki wondered aloud, having never seen the film before. Ida covered his boyfriend's ears and shot what he would probably consider a dirty look towards the two girls talking, though it came out more as slightly disappointed.
Hermione Granger, and that time I was a Time Lord!
Midoriya piped up with a laugh after making sure that Todoroki's ears were still covered, and that seemed to prompt the rest of his classmates to put in their own takes on the series, renamed for Hermione.
Hermione Granger, and that time I realized I was hot and smart and saved Harry's ass with research again! All the time, really! He would have died so many times without me!
Mina laughed as she shoved more popcorn into her mouth.
Hermione Granger, and that time Harry was too emo to actually do shit, so I did shit in his name because I am the power behind the throne, clearly. Also, P.S. I fought Death Eaters and won.
Tokoyami supplied with a sage murmur, a few of his classmates nodding their heads equally sagely.
Hermione Granger, and that time I told Harry about the dangers of plagiarism, and oh look, I was right.
Bakugou, surprisingly, grumbled, earning a laugh from Baraka and a grin from Kirishima and a few sheepish looks from Mina, Sarah, and Kaminari.
Hermione Granger, and that time I let Harry decide where to go and what to do, and we ended up wandering aimlessly and nearly dying several times unnecessarily before saving him at Hogwarts.
Showed his side supplying the last title. Most of his class looked back at him in surprise from where they sat scattered around the room, fixing him with a few delighted and amused looks.
What? Hermione is the only logical one in that group.
Shota defended.
She's absolutely underrated.
They laughed, and Ida, after sending a pointed look around the room that went mostly ignored, finally unclasped his hands from Todoroki's ears. Todoroki, for his part, hardly seemed to notice, having been content reading the subtitles put on for those hard of hearing, or, in other words, Bakugou.
Hey, Kaminari, can you pass the Doritos?
Ojiro asked absently a few minutes later, the room having once more lapsed into silence as attention was returned to the screen. Wordlessly, Kaminari passed the bolt his classmate's way, and Ojiro received it with an easy, "Thanks."
Hey, man,
Kaminari grinned, attention split between whatever had just popped into his head to trigger a shit-eating grin and the television in front of him. What can I say except you're welcome? He was cut off with an absent-minded tug of Shota's capture weapon, effectively silencing the boy and his indignant protests.
Shush.
Shota waved half-heartedly towards his student as he unwound his capture weapon and brought it back to rest on his shoulders, eyes glued to the screen.
No mixing franchises. Now be quiet, this party's good.
Kaminari humphed in indignation but said no more as his classmates snickered at him and the Chamber of Secrets opened up on the television. Shota rounded a corner one Wednesday afternoon and was immediately hit with a wave of regrets and an overwhelming desire to turn back around, walk away, and pretend to have seen nothing. Unfortunately, the bonds of disciplinary responsibility bound him to the spot as he realized with a unique type of weariness as Kirishima dropped his legs from around Bakugou's waist that he was now 3 for 3, with all the established couples in his homeroom class being found in compromising positions of PDA. Or at least he assumed so. He wasn't aware of any relationships outside of Jiro and Yorozu, Kirishima and Bakugou, and Midoriya, Ida, and Todoroki at the moment. Honestly, if there were any more he didn't really want to know. There was only so much knowledge Shota could hold about his students' love lives before it became too much, and the limit for that had been passed the instant he knew anything at all. Huh! Bakugou muttered, his voice suggesting a confused frown crossing his face, though Shota couldn't see for certain due to the blonde boy's back facing him. Oi, Kiri, what?
Bakugou.
Shota sighed, deadpan, and Bakugou's form went rigid as Kirishima's already bright red face continued to inch closer and closer to his hair color. Slowly, regretfully, Bakugou turned to face his homeroom teacher, his expression a mix between a scoff and pure mortification. Bakugou cussed under his breath, and for once, Shota felt the same way. Dragging his hand down his face slowly in a weak attempt to milk every second he could before having to deal with the situation before him, Shota let out a long, beleaguered groan.
I regret ever giving you children any relationship advice whatsoever.
He finally managed to mutter, and Kirishima began to shake his head frantically. What? Sensei, no! Kirishima practically squeaked, his voice half-pitched from embarrassment. This has nothing to do with... This isn't that! Wait! Bakugou cuffed his boyfriend gently on the head in an effort to shut him up at the same time that Shota held a hand out to signal the boy to stop.
No. I regret it. I don't even care. I regret it. Ugh.
Shota definitely did not pout.
You just had to, didn't you? You literally live together now, and you just had to make me figure out some sort of punishment for PDA in the halls? Really?
Kirishima had the grace to look chastened, and even Bakugou looked somewhat embarrassed, though with his range of facial expression, it could have just as easily been constipation.
God, I didn't want to have to do this,
Shota complained.
But I can see now that I have no choice.
Bakugou eyed him warily, and Kirishima looked even more scared than he had before. What? What are you gonna do? The latter hedged. Shota grimaced in response.
You've all done this to yourselves,
Shota said dryly, as All Might fiddled with the projector. The older man focused steadfastly on his task in an obvious attempt to put off any thought about the subject he was condemned to teach in a few short minutes.
You want me to what?
All Might had practically choked out once Nezu had informed him with unnerving joviality of the subject change on the roster for the man the next day.
I believe you heard me perfectly clearly, Yagi-san.
Nezu chirped back happily, swinging his legs from where he sat on the edge of the desk in the teacher's lounge. Shota wasn't sure if the principal was merciful for choosing to do this when there were none of their co-workers around to tease All Might for his misfortune, or if it was a carefully planned sadistic move calculated to ensure that All Might couldn't escape the conversation or shoulder the responsibility off to anyone else.
Why?
All Might asked desperately, shooting Shota a pathetic look as the other man shrugged wearily.
We normally present this curriculum when they're second years,
Shota explained to the other man.
but with the dorm system we put into place, as well as some recent developments.
At this, the older man blushed a little, no doubt deducing exactly what Shota had meant.
I thought that it would be better to move it up a year.
And I wholeheartedly agreed.
Nezu put in from his perch on the desk, where he was now fiddling with a fancy pen that had been left there.
But why me?
All Might asked desperately, and Shota nearly felt a little pity for the man given his assigned task.
I thought it best for the kids to have a teacher they trusted with this material,
Nezu replied easily.
And you know how kids are about this kind of thing. Hopefully, with a figure they respect doing the teaching, they're more likely to pay attention and take the content seriously.
All Might was visibly wilting, unable to find any holes in the principal's logic, and otherwise already condemned by an order from his boss.
Would it midnight?
He tried as a final escape, only for Shota to shake his head firmly.
The school already toes the line having an adult hero on staff.
He sighed.
Indeed.
Nezu's smile twisted a little.
I'd rather not deal with the paperwork that might result from any legal issues with letting her present the material.
Not to mention she'd be a little too enthusiastic, and probably wouldn't follow the established lesson material very well.
Shota grimaced.
No, I do believe you are the best choice for this.
Nezu finished decisively with a rather wicked glint in his eye, and All Might withered as his fate was sealed. So now, as the former #1 hero readied his presentation, Shota ignored all questions from his students, who had no idea what the last-minute change in curriculum meant, called into his sleeping bag, and sequestered himself in the dark underbelly of his desk. He, hands down, did not want to be in the room for this. But then when it came to some things, he wasn't sure he trusted his students as far as he could throw them. Unfortunately, this fell into that category. As he snuggled down into his little cave, the projector could be heard whirring to life. Shota could pinpoint the exact moment it showed the first slide, going by the gasps and murmurs that broke out collectively throughout the room. The slide, Shota knew, read, Sexual Education Unit, Consent, Health, and Everything You Need to Know.
All right, everyone,
All Might called hoarsely over the murmur of activity that had broken out across the class. His halting voice suggested that he was back to reading off of index cards, like he had when he first started teaching, and common sense spoke to him wanting to be literally anywhere else rather than here.
Now today we're going to...
Oh my! Kaminori called excitedly, and Shota could just picture the boy's hand waving exuberantly in the air, his body halfway out of his seat. What's a penis? The class broke out in laughter. All Might started to cough up blood, and Shota prayed for death in his little corner of the room. Problem Children Group Chat 1727. Funky elbows. Thunder. Is that time again, folks? Alien Queen.
Wow! Lit!
Fucking never.
very flashy,
Kicleon. Sparks fly.
edgy, electrifying.
One missed call. Aizawa to Pikachu at 1727.
Aizawa, what the fuck?
One missed call. Aizawa to Pikachu at 1728.
Aizawa, what is happening?
3 missed calls. Aizawa to Pikachu at 1729.
Aizawa, Kaminari, you respond to me right goddamn now. Are you okay?
1 missed call. Aizawa to Pikachu at 1730.
Small Bean, I get the feeling that Aizawa said he didn't know about this.
Kung Fu Panda. Awkward.
Aizawa, what do I not know? I was just sent a picture of my student getting struck by a whole ass lightning bolt. What do I not fucking know?
2 missed calls. Aizawa to Pikachu at 1732.
Aizawa, Pikachu, answer me right now.
Nyum.
Small Bean.
Aizawa Sensei, you're giving Ina an aneurysm with the swearing.
Pikachu.
Oh, whoa, Sensei, that's just a side effect of my quirk.
Aizawa. What? Pikachu.
Yeah, when I get caught outside in a thunderstorm, I tend to get struck by lightning a lot. Really freaked people out the first time it happened, but that's why I carry around earplugs, just in case a random thunderstorm starts, because the electricity part is totally fine, and actually feels kinda good, but the sound is a bit no bueno.
Mr. Murder.
Relatable.
Aizawa.
had to know what thought to give this context. Know what thought to lead with that. Small Bean. We all knew? We thought you did too?
Aizawa.
Obviously not. Christ, you're all disasters.
Francophile. LLL. 1806. Scram. Hey, kiddos! The listeners! Anyone want to explain why my husband is seething and angrily petting our cats?
Mind meld. Read above.
Scram. Oh! LOL! The sun filtered through the windows across from the dining table in thin streams, the cool morning air barely beginning to warm up as the sun crept over the horizon. It was a little after sunrise, and Shoda was reveling in the early morning peace that permeated the kitchen as coffee percolated slowly into the number 1 dad mug Hitoshi had given him as an only partially a joke last Father's Day. Some students slowly began to trickle downstairs and into the kitchen, pouring themselves glasses of orange juice and bowls of cereal, and starting the rice cooker with a healthy amount of rubbed eyes and bleary yawns. The kids had watched Beauty and the Beast the night before, and Yaoyorozu exited the stairwell dressed for the day with fuzzy slippers on her feet that had been a gift from Jiro, humming a familiar tune. For once, the rest of the kids weren't super boisterous that morning, letting the girls' humming trail through the slowly awakening kitchen. Shota sat with his coffee on the bar stools at the kitchen counter, scrolling through his phone and reviewing his itinerary for the day. "Little Dom," Yaoyorozu murmured with a little smile as she cracked a few eggs into a pan on top of melted butter. "It's a quiet morning." "Not one day," Uraraka sang back with a bleary smile. Spoon paused in her cereal. "Like the one before." "Little Dorm," Ida pitched in after some good-natured ribbing from his boyfriends on either side, both smiling. "Full of, budding heroes." "Waking up to say," Yaoyorozu giggled, scrambling her eggs in the pan, the sizzle filling the air with steadily increasing volume, right as Aoyama stumbled into the room with a nuzzling smile, calling out, "Bonjour! Bonjour!" Yaoyorozu greeted back with a laugh as Aoyama migrated towards the toaster. "Bonjour! Bonjour!" Most of the crowd of kids gathered downstairs echoed back and forth to each other with tired laughs.
Bonjour.
Showed a deadpan on cue after a few pointed looks sent his way by his students. They cheered a little in response, and he brought his coffee mug up to his lips to conceal the light, too soft smile turning his lips up in the vulnerable air of the early morning hour. "There goes my girlfriend with her tea like always," Jiro muttered, barely singing, as she walked up to Yaoyorozu, who, true to form, was sipping at her tea as she turned down the heat on the eggs, and gave the taller girl a light peck on the cheek.
"No PDA or you're expelled."
Shota pipes in absent-mindedly as he scrolls through his phone, only to look up at the light laughter that followed and realize that he'd inadvertently rhymed his command with the next lyric in the song.
"Well, that threat's been just the same," Todoroki deadpanned to the laughter of his peers. "Since the day that we first came through the doors of Class 1A.
"Oh, fucking hell!" Bakugou complained as he entered the kitchen to find his peers singing Disney before he'd even had his breakfast. This, of course, caused all the kids in the room to burst out into varying degrees of laughter at the perfect accidental rhyme. Shota smiled a little stronger this time and didn't add it quite so deeply in his coffee. 21-29, Zero Hanta. "Hey, Sensei! So, hypothetically, how can you tell if you've overloaded a washing machine with electricity, or if it's stopped for a reason other than 10 million volts accidentally being applied directly to it?" Aizawa showed up.
Zero
Hanta.
Sensei!
Aizawa showed up.
Why isn't Kaminari responding to my texts?
Zero Hanta. Aizawa showed up.
Does this hypothetical have anything to do with the lights flickering on and off 10 minutes ago?
Zero Hanta.
I plead the fifth.
Aizawa Shota.
This is Japan. You can't plead the American Fifth Amendment.
On a completely unrelated note, thank you for teaching us how to flip the switch on the breaker after Kami shorted the building after the third time. Aizawa Shota.
Put on rubber gloves in case there's any residual electricity and try unplugging the machine and then plugging it back in. You'll need to move the machine away from the wall first to access the plug. Let me know if that doesn't work and I'll get the repair forms out.
Hanta. Got it, thanks. 1 second. Aizawa Shoda.
Cyril?
Aizawa Shoda.
Oh. Way?
Hanta.
Wait! Sorry, Kaminari stole my phone while I tried to fix the washing machine.
Aizawa Shoda.
I gathered. Verdict?
Hanta.
It shuddered a bit at first, but it's working, thanks.
Aizawa Shoda.
Yup.
The kids, Shoda and Hisashi, had been stuck in the dorm building for the better part of the past week. A security breach had been identified by Nezu 5 days ago, and they'd had to wait for a few separate people to fly into the area so their quirks could assure the principal and the justifiably worried parents that the intruder was identified and caught. In the meantime, they'd all been confined to the dorm, considering how often 1A had been the focus of villains in the past year alone. Classes had been held in an impromptu fashion throughout the building, starting with the living room and then moving to the basement when Shoda realized that hosting class in a recreational area wasn't a great recipe for focused students. They were all getting a bit testy and more than a little restless from being cooped up in one place for so long, and some of the girls were trying to convince Shoda to let them go out for Yaoyorozu's upcoming birthday a few days later.
I don't care if you go as a group,
Shoda ground out from behind gritted teeth, praying for patience for the umpteenth time that day.
You're not leaving until the principal has cleared the campus with the security team.
But it's Yamomo's birthday, Hagakure cried pitifully, and there will be fireworks. And we've been locked in here for so long. Murmurs of agreement came from the entire class, who were all gathered in the common room, working together on a study guide for a test Midnight had had to postpone until the whole ordeal was over.
I don't like it any more than you,
Shoda assured her, rubbing at the budding migraine forming along his temple.
We just gotta hope and pray, kiddos.
Hisashi piped up from his place cross-legged in front of Uraraka's legs, the girl brushing his hair with care as she took a break from studying.
Nothing else to it.
Yeah, Hagakure sighed in dramatic acceptance. It's just like, when will normal life begin again, you know? Hisashi whipped around at that, drawing a little eep from Uraraka at the sudden motion, as well as the manic glint in his eyes.
Oh!
He assured the invisible girl with a wide grin that made Shoda fear for his sanity, scrolling through his phone to open Spotify and connect to the Bluetooth speakers in the living room in one fell swoop.
I know exactly! What do you mean?
A light guitar strumming came through the speakers, and Shoda sent his husband with a paralyzing glare that only served to make the other man grin cheekily.
Hisashi, no.
Hisashi, yes! Mike and Hagakure both crooned at the same time, pointing at each other as the rest of the kids in 1A looked a mixture of amused, enthusiastic,
and done.
Hagakure started, dripping herself dramatically over an armchair before she started singing along with the lyrics as they began. 7 a.m. the usual morning lineup. Starting the chores and see till the floor's all clean. Uraraka supplied, looking pointedly at the chore chart that Ida had created a while back, her and Kirishima's names both selected for the day.
Polish your marks, do laundry, and mop and shine up.
Kirishima continued with a huge grin, sending finger guns back at Uraraka and causing her to laugh while Bakugou shouted indignant protests at how the boy
never works and polish, don't fucking lie.
Sweep again and by then. Uraraka laughed, joined by Kirishima for, it's like 7:15.
God,
Shoda grumbled under his breath, regretting burying himself so deeply under papers he had to grade and how it limited his escape options.
And so I'll read a book.
Midoriya sang along with a sheepish smile from behind the pile of them he had to his side.
Or maybe 2 or 3.
Todoroki supplemented in a murmur with a fond eye roll. I'll add a few new paintings to my gallery. Hagakure sang, whisking a pot of nail polish out of a pocket with a flourish. I'll play guitar. Jiro deadpanned.
And knit.
Koda supplied a little hesitantly, but with a genuine smile.
Cook.
Bakugou practically spat a little off beat, but close enough to count when Uraraka shot him a cheery smile that showed a knew from experience was impossible to say no to. And basically, and Gakure finished the stanza cheerfully before being joined by Mima for Just Wonder When Will Our Lives Begin.
Then after lunch, it's puzzles.
Tokoyami mumbled, with Shoji putting in darts. And Sato finishing baking. Next to the featherboard, the three in a small cluster from where they were trying to figure out one of the questions on the study guide.
Oh, now they work together.
Shota grumbled to himself as he tried to focus on his marking.
Paper mache.
Tsuyu croaked with a small grin.
I made a ballet.
Mina cheered, doing a pirouette in the kitchen on the way to get study snacks.
And chase.
Ida input boldly, a darky smile on his face that made both of his boyfriends look at him fondly.
Pottery.
Kaminari teared, holding up his very poorly homemade hot chocolate mug from where he was sprawled out with it across the carpeted floor.
And ventriloquy.
Shinzo gave in his dry input, the smirk on his face suggesting that he only popped up for the joke the line had with his Quirk, which had been teasingly referred to more than once as Puppet Master. Candle making! Yaoyorozu guessed the lyric hesitantly but correctly. At Midoriya's enthusiastic nod of confirmation, she pulled a small candle from her skin, making a few of her classmates laugh a little and pulling a proud little smile to her face.
Then I'll stretch,
Ojiro put in, stretching for effect and causing a few pops to come from his back.
Maybe sketch,
Midoriya smiled, and Uraraka laughed at what was probably a memory of her friend pausing a news broadcast to sketch a debuting hero's costume, not a rare occurrence.
Dig a climb.
Zero pitched in, shooting a piece of tape to stick to the ceiling and pulling himself an inch off the ground to swing lightly with an impish grin.
Sumo-dress!
Aoyama crooned, sparkling.
Dear Lord, someone save me.
Shota groaned to himself, but lingered. No one heard him.
And then I'll read his books.
Todoroki joked in a deadpan, eyeing the stack of Midoriya's library books next to him warily.
If I have time to spare,
I'll paint the world sidebar. And Gakure sang loudly, only to be reassured by Kaminari.
I'm sure there's room somewhere.
And then I'll brush.
Hisashi crooned, grabbing the brush from Uraraka and dragging it through his long locks, down for once instead of gelled up, and causing a few of the kids to laugh at his antics.
Stuck in the same place we've always been.
Mina moaned sadly, throwing an arm over her eyes dramatically.
It has been 5 days.
Shota insists, to no one in particular.
And I'll keep wondering,
Uraraka sang.
And wondering,
Uraraka croaked.
And wondering,
Kirishima sighed.
And wondering,
and Gakure continued, but a few of her peers pitched in with her to finish.
Where will the lives begin?
And tomorrow night,
Kirishima sang lowly before letting light electricity arc across his skin for dramatic effect.
Lights will appear.
Kirishima pitched Bakugou's side lightly, startling the explosive boy into letting loose a few small fireworks in his palms to add to the effect before hardening himself with a small laugh at the inevitable backlash. Just like they do on my birthday each year. Yaoyorozu sang, sheepish but hopeful, in Shota's direction. And here I thought I was past the effects of guilt tripping. Shota thought to himself tiredly as he felt an uncomfortable pull at his gut at the girl's gaze.
What is it like?
Agakure sighed dramatically before using her quirk to reflect the light around her, giving her silhouette a glowing effect as she continued.
How well they glow.
If the serum works fast,
Hisashi suggested with a wink at the kids and a smirk at Shona.
Mother might just let you go.
That's it, Shota growled.
I am not Mother, and I told you, you cannot.
Silence echoed throughout the common room as Shota's phone rang, a few members of 1A sweating in nervous relief as they were saved by the ringtone. Shota kept eye contact with his class for as long as he could, before risking the call going to voicemail, and then swiftly answered it, still not breaking his gaze.
Hello?
He demanded, only to be met by the almost suspiciously cheery voice of his boss.
Over here, sir.
Nezu's voice came from the other end,
Lilting and peppy. I have excellent news. Our security team has just apprehended the intruder and ensured that the rest of the campus is safe, so your lockdown is lifted. Enjoy!
With a prompt click, the call ended with no opportunity for Shota to respond. Slowly lowering his cell from his face, Shota narrowed his gaze at his students, some of whom had begun sweating nervously. Silence reigned for a few moments more before it was broken by Yaoyorozu. Sensei? She hedged, and he swiveled his gaze toward where she sat, looking sheepish and a bit resigned. It's really fine if we can't go out. We understand the security needs. We can figure something out. We were just hoping...
Everything is secure. You could go.
Shota interrupted her flatly, unearthing himself from the papers he was grading, gathering them up, and leaving the room to the outbursts of joy and relief. Shota was 90% sure that Bakugou left the room immediately to go for a run around campus, followed, but not accompanied, by Midoriya, Ida, and Ojiro. As Shota climbed the stairs to his apartment, trying to rid his head of the Tangled song before it could get properly stuck, he heard footsteps on the stairs behind him. Before he could turn around, the familiar lanky arm wrapped itself around one of Shota's shoulders cheekily. Good timing! What do you say, Sho? Hisashi grinned as he climbed the stairs next to his husband, and Shota's eyes narrowed suspiciously in response. Now that he thought about it...
Nezu timed that on purpose, didn't he?
Shota accused flatly. Hisashi threw his head back jovially and laughed at that, shoving his phone screen over to Shota, who read the messages shown there.
The adults? Question mark.
Group chat. Chat includes -5-hour energy, Eraserhead,
Yow, man!
All Might, Brick House, Samantha's, King Shamer, Midnight,
Gring! Ectoplasm. Yeet!
Present Mike, Dracula, Blood King, and God, Nezu. 1620. King Shamer.
Blazes!
Yeet.
Blaze it!
Brick House.
My co-workers are more immature than the children we teach.
1704. God muted -5-hour energy's notifications for the next 10 minutes. God.
Good news, everyone. The security threat has been identified and neutralized. Any and all lockdowns are now lifted, effective immediately. Ring!
That's great, but why did you mute Aizawa's notifications? His kids have probably been driving him more crazy than anyone. Dracula.
Excuse me, you try staying in one building for 5 days straight with Monoma.
Grin. Valid. Sorry.
God. Aizawa-san is currently busy with his class, and I didn't wish to interrupt their bonding time.
King Shame. Oh, poor Shota. God. CCTV sing-along and before. Dracula.
You have our common rooms on surveillance? God. I rarely check the videos, but yes, my entertainment senses were tingling.
Y'all might.
Oh, well, regardless, that is good news about the security.
God.
Indeed.
Shota blinked twice at his phone. Slowly. The timestamp of Nezu's first message was right at the beginning of his class's impromptu sing-along, and sure enough, when Shota checked his phone, he had a few new muted notifications from the teacher's chats. Shota paused in the stairwell, looked up at the ceiling, found what appeared to be an innocent little black dot, and flipped the bird to the hidden camera. Hisashi's uproarious laughter could be heard throughout the dorms in response, and halfway across campus, Nezu snickered. Mutation quirks Shota had found over the years were their own kind of unusual. They presented their own kinds of problems. Tsuyu, he learned, was no different. Frogs were obviously different from humans in many ways, many of which manifested through Tsuyu's quirk. They could jump higher, check. Their tongues were longer and more versatile, check. They could secrete mucus of varying degrees of poison and swallow things and regurgitate them, check. And unfortunately, check. They ate insects, check. Shota thought it distasted, trying not to hold the bag of freshly acquired crickets, flies, and worms so far away from his body that the cashier at the pet store judged him. It had been an interesting development, to say the least, when Shota had emptied the groceries and personal items request box to find a small note, written on a green post-it in Tsuyu's neat writing, requesting to talk to Shota privately about some sensitive needs. A brief flash of horror had, Shota felt understandably, flood over him. Please don't be condoms. He'd prayed to some deity he didn't believe in. Please don't be condoms. I can handle pads and tampons, but please don't be condoms. It was not condoms. Still, after hearing what the request was, he couldn't find it in himself to be relieved.
What kind of dietary requirements?
Shota had asked Tsuyu later that day, after seeking her out and having her start to describe her issue.
I don't need them with every meal, the girl repeated. But at times I have strong cravings for the kind of stuff a frog eats. Crickets, worms, flies.
Tsuyu listed off methodically.
If I go too long without any, my quirk gets weaker in some ways. I can't jump as high or control my tongue as much, for example.
Shota nodded, deep in thought.
So, what do you need, and how much of it?
And after another moment,
and where do you usually get it?
And that was how he found himself standing on the train back to UA, a few groceries in one hand and a bag full of insects in varying states of life and death in another. He was more or less used to it by now, and the few odd looks that he drew were easily ignored. The train announced his stop, and Shota shuffled towards the doors, striding out once they opened, then heading in the direction of UA. It was about a 10-minute-long walk to the front gates of the school, and Shota used the time to half-heartedly review the coming week's lesson plans in his mind. He was halfway back to campus when a thought struck him, and he shifted his groceries and insects to one arm so he could fish his phone out of his jumpsuit with the other hand. Hefting the bag back up into a firmer grip, Shota looked both ways before crossing the street and typing a question into his internet search bar from muscle memory. Almost absent-mindedly, he hits the search button and watches with steadily increasing horror as the results load. Adult frog diet. What do adult frogs eat? It's always important to make sure that you know what a pet's diet consists of before committing to a new furry, scaly, or slimy friend. Frogs dine on a variety of culinary delights, which vary based on species, size, and age of frog. Where younger and smaller frogs can subsist almost solely on algae and small insects such as crickets and worms, older and larger frogs have slightly different diets. Some frogs are known to eat everything they can fit in their mouths, including small snakes, turtles, mice, and even other smaller frogs.
Small snakes, turtles, mice, and even other smaller frogs. Now, Shota didn't consider himself to be squeamish or easily grossed out. He couldn't afford to be in his profession, both underground heroics and teaching. Nevertheless, the thought of his student throwing dead mice down a gullet. Ugh. The crickets didn't seem so awful anymore.
After that day, every time Tsuyu would fill out a grocery request form for Quirk-based dietary requirements, Shota would silently dread that when he looked down to read her writing, he'd see something other than small insects written down. It got to the point that he eventually resolved to stop being such a wimp and just ask her. So one day, Shota confronted Tsuyu when he passed over her crickets, steeled himself, and asked a question he really wasn't sure he wanted an answer to.
Are crickets the only dietary animal you'll need?
Tsuyu put a finger on her chin, tilted her head, and looked at him as if to say, "Go on." Shota almost could have sworn he saw a flicker of amusement in her eyes, like she knew exactly what he was struggling with, and was a little entertained by it.
I read up a little more on frog diets,
Shota admitted, trying to swallow past a suddenly dry mouth.
It says larger frogs will sometimes eat turtles, snakes, mice, other frogs.
Shota trailed off at the small hillback smile that graced Tsuyu's lips.
And I'm a larger frog,
Tsuyu supplied helpfully, to which Shota could only nod. She let out a little chuckle, seemingly having decided that she'd kept her homeroom teacher in suspense long enough, and shook her head.
No, girl,
she reassured him.
My cravings stop at small insects.
Shota let out a sigh of relief with a breath he hadn't realized he was holding.
Thank God.
He muttered, and Tsuyu chuckled again.
Yeah, that might have been awkward.
Tsuyu allowed mirthfully.
I wouldn't have known what to do if Koda had caught on about that.
Shota admitted wryly.
Also, my little siblings technically qualify as smaller frogs.
Tsuyu deadpanned and Shota winced.
Oof.
Yeah.
So, just crickets.
Just the crickets.
It was getting into the school year, which means it was getting into the winter semester, which means it was about time that it started to snow. Shota knew this was coming.
It didn't mean he had to like it.
The first snowstorm of the school year came in poetic beauty, a gentle sprinkling of snow blanketing UA's campus in white overnight. A good few inches accumulated before the first member of 1A awoke to find the winter wonderland that had descended outside, and an hour or two after the earliest bird had woken up, a shriek rang out through the dorms with a distinctly Kaminari-esque tune. "Oh my God, it's Christmas!" Shota grimaced along with a few of the quieter early morning students as he stole some coffee from the common kitchen, having run out in his own personal kitchen with the previous night's grading spree and not wanting to ask Yaoyorozu to use her Keurig.
Good to know that something will wake him up, I guess.
Shinso remarks dryly, looking half dead with exhaustion and close to face-planting into a cereal. Before anyone could respond, the stumbling footsteps of 1A's self-proclaimed resident electric disaster echoed down the stairs, and Kaminari shot into the doorway in sleeping boxers, a loose sweater, and hair
Down looked like nothing else.
"Guys, it's Christmas!" he shrieked predictably, while half the room groaned and turned away.
Kaminari.
Shota started irritably. "Christmas! Christmas! No!
Kaminari.
Shota seethed, feeling a headache coming on as his student just blinked at him, still asleep aside from his enthusiasm. Shota looked resolutely at his student's face as he finished. Bants. Kaminari's face turned beet red and he disappeared back up the stairs with speed that Shota hadn't known he possessed. It wasn't until after school had gotten out for the day, the snow beginning to fall gently once more as a beautiful backdrop to a Friday afternoon, that the kids truly got to enjoy the weather. Where Shota could usually count on at least a few students hanging behind after the last class to pack up slowly or ask questions, today it seemed that his students were out the door the instant the bell rang. Shota blinked in surprise and sighed, trying to muster up the annoyance he'd normally feel if any of his other classes had acted like this. At the sound of a few shouts outside, Shota turned and looked out the window, only to see half his class engaged in a snowball fight as they ran back to the dorms. Upon further inspection, he also saw Bakugou screaming at everyone who nailed him. The boy tried to propel his own throws forward with his quirk, only to realize that explosions and snow don't mix well. An unusually fond smile crept its way across Shota's face. He shook his head in amusement and strolled out of his classroom, following his students in a dual bid at entertainment and damage control. He trailed back to the dorm at a more leisurely pace, walking through the path his students had trampled through the snow. White snowflakes trailed through the air, twisting and turning in the light breeze, though Shota tended to grouse over how muddy snow made everything once it melted. He truly did enjoy winter weather like this. Watching his breath puff up and condense in the air, catching a few snowflakes on his sleeve to admire their structure before they melted, reveling in the refreshing crunch of snow under his boots. It wasn't practical, he'd admit it. There wasn't much purpose or reason behind admiring nature's winter weather the way he did, but it felt nice, he mused as he slowly came within earshot of the dorms. It felt peaceful. A yellow blur shot out of the dorm building, wrapped in jeans, a maroon sweatshirt, and a blue scarf. Though Shota could barely even distinguish which student it was, the shrill cry of Kaminari cut through the air with ease, carrying the line Shota realized he'd been dreading since he woke up that morning and saw the snow. "Do you want to build a snowman?" Bakugou came stomping up behind Kaminari, yelling at him to shut up and pelting him with another snowball through the face. Shota just sighed, grieved his lost moment of peace, and secretly thanked Bakugou for the contribution to his sanity.
Luckily, the impromptu sex ed intervention taught by All Might had seemed to either entertain or horrify Shota's students enough that his coworkers stopped finding them in compromising situations in the hallways. Unfortunately, his kids knew a double standard when they saw one. It was a little, simple thing, something Shota probably wouldn't have thought twice about, considering how busy he'd been that week, and the fact that his class already knew he and Hisashi were married. In his rush out the door that morning, Shota had once again forgotten his lunch at the apartment, and Hisashi had swung by to drop it off since he didn't have any morning classes that day. "Here you go, Sho!" Hisashi smiled as he handed Shota a neatly wrapped bento with a smile that still somehow managed to give Shota butterflies even after almost a decade of marriage to the idiot. Shota gave a grateful grunt, and his husband's eyes softened in response. "Come home once you're done today. You've been working too hard lately," Hisashi murmured, and Shota simply nodded once in agreement. They were right outside the closed door of 1A, the hallways around them deserted as Shota's kids filled out some forms about costume upgrades in the room behind them.
I'll try.
"That's all I ask." Hisashi winked cheekily, earning an amused, though he'd deny it, eye roll from the gruff pro hero in front of him. In the next moment, Hisashi had leaned forward ever so slightly, rising up on his tiptoes to peck Shota on the cheek. Shota blushed despite himself, scowling on reflex, while Hisashi grew a smug grin in front of him. He took small solace in the fact that he was still 2 centimeters taller than his husband, hair not included, he'd always insist, so at least the other man had to get up on his toes to pull that stunt. Shota was about to remind him about this when a low wolf whistle came from behind him, accompanied by a few chuckles. Shota whirled around to glare at the half-open door behind him, Ida halfway through opening it fully and looking incredibly sheepish and apologetic. Kaminari, Mina, and Aoyama had all crowded around the open door and wore wicked smiles on their faces. Before Shota could preemptively shut them up, Gakare piped up from in back of them. "No PDA in school, Sensei!" she sing-songed innocently, prompting a wave of chuckles from her classmates and a few flushes from the students whose stories had apparently spread. Midoriya looked a little like he wanted nothing more than to have Muriel's quirk so he could sink into the floor, while Jiro and Todoroki looked a little smug. Shota shot the group around the door a glare that sent them scurrying back to their seats, sighing as he turned around and waved his sheepish husband off. Walking back into the glass room and shutting the door behind him felt eerily like cutting off his only escape route as Shota put his bento on his desk. Before he could properly reprimand the group for their impromptu eavesdropping, though, he was stopped by a cutthroat accusation. "You absolute hypocrite!" Bakugou seethed coldly, prompting the rest of 1A to once again burst into laughter, this time even more uproariously. Shota sunk down into his seat, glared at his unrepentant student, and fought down the urge to inform Bakugou that his husband, pecking him on the forehead, was not the equivalent of being found with his partner wrapped around his hips in the school hallway. Detention was all he grit out instead. From the victorious smile that crossed Bakugou's face, Shota still felt like he'd lost that one. 2021. Hagakure Toru. "Hey, Sensei, can I ask for some advice?" Aizawa Shota.
I get the feeling that even if I say no, it won't matter.
Hagakure Toru. "Oh, you know it so well. So, hypothetically..." Aizawa Shota.
What now?
Hagakure Toru. "If I was doing laundry earlier and left the sack in the washer on accident and just realized now and went down to get it and saw that someone was already using the machine to wash their whites right after I'd finished..." Aizawa Shota.
Who have you cursed?
Hagakure Toru. "Bakugou?" "Oh no!" Aizawa Shota.
Well, it was nice knowing you, I guess.
Hagakure Toru. "Sensei, no! You gotta help me!" Aizawa Shota.
Says who?
Hagakure Toru. There's gotta be something in a teacher's contract about protecting your students' right. Wait, that lesson you taught us on hero ethics. There's that clause in the pledge you take when you become a hero to protect people that need to protect it. Once Bakugou sees all his spots turned pink, I'm gonna need a lot of protection, Sensei.
Aizawa Shoda.
Of all the days for you to pay attention, you had to pick the day I went over that.
What can I say? I'm just a great student. I can feel you about to bring up my midterm placement. Don't bring up my midterm placement. Just help me survive to tomorrow, please.
Aizawa Shoda.
Fine. Hypothetically, you would listen to me very carefully.
You can't see it, but I'm nodding.
Aizawa Shoda.
Step 1. Put on your hero costume. Step 2. Take off the gloves. Step 3. Hide and pray to whichever gods you believe to.
Shit!
Aizawa Shoda.
Godspeed. I'm going to sleep. I'm going to need the rest once Bakugou sees all his white exercise tanks have turned pink.
Maybe Kiri will convince him it's mainly.
Aizawa Shoda.
Maybe.
Wait, really?
Aizawa Shoda.
Sure, and maybe Mike and Bakugou's natural hearing will magically come back in the night as they sleep.
Wow, okay, rude and unnecessary. Don't need that sass.
Aizawa Shoda.
Can't hear you over the unconsciousness slowly claiming me. Bye.
I'm gonna die. Fuck, I'm gonna die.
End of Jones. Call me maybe. By Andai. If you enjoyed this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or a review at the original story from the link in the descriptions. Thanks to all members for their support, and I encourage everyone to become one. Thank you for listening.